Today, 7th of October 2023, marks exactly, would you believe, 20 years since the very first Wheeler Dealers programme aired. Now, since that time, let's be honest, Mike's got a little bit chunkier, but Ed's still, just as tall as he was. But I thought it'd be really interesting for us to go back and have a look and see what we could find out of what happened to those cars and also what they might be worth nowadays. So today we're going to take a look at the Porsche 924, the SAAB 900 Turbo and also the Volkswagen Golf GTI MK1. So let's go all the way back to the beginning. Now, just to remind you, back in the early days of Wheeler Dealers, it was actually two half-hour programs where they first brought the car and then Ed did some work, and then in the second program Ed completed his work and they sold the car. So the Porsche 924 was featured in the first two episodes. Now Mike brought this for just £700, and one of the reasons for this is it had a dent in the near side door and in the rear quarter, and that obviously devalued it. Now once they got it back to the workshop, Mike went out and found a second-hand door. Ed got on with repairing the rear quarter panel damage and repainted it with aerosols, and let's be honest, he did a pretty good job. The other thing that needed attention is both door mirrors were damaged, so they had to get a pair of those. The wheels were in quite a state. Now if you remember back for those early Porsche 924s, they had like a polished rim and a black centre part. So Ed polished those up, painted the centres black. He fitted a new stereo, he gave the engines a service, and just to finish it off he put the fresh decals down the side. Now if we look at the numbers on this one, Mike paid £700 for it. The repair and fixing costs were £310, so that gave him a total cost of £1,010. Now Mike managed to sell this car on for £1,500, so that gave him a profit of £490. Now what I've done to try and gauge a value, because this can be obviously a very subjective area, is I've got Practical Classics magazine, and they have a very comprehensive valuation section, and they give obviously various grades. Now generally the cars that Wheeler Dealers sold were sold as being all sorted, ready to go, so I've classed them as class 1 condition. Now for a 924, a class 1 condition, they are looking at 3,950 in today's terms, so that is an increase of 2,450. Now the final thing you're obviously interested in is what's happened to that car now. Well, I looked up GWL 496Y and there's nothing, absolutely nothing. So there's two possibilities. One, it's been scrapped, which I think is probably most likely. The other one is that maybe it's been, that car's had a private plate put on it, and that's why I can find no record. But there's no history on that car at all, and I've searched the forums and still nothing. So moving on to episodes 3 and 4, this featured a SAAB 900 Turbo. Now this back in the day was very much the choice of the doctors and the dentists of the world, and to be honest, the chap that Mike brought this car off did look like he could have been a dentist or a doctor, and he kept a very comprehensive file on this car as well, so that was a good starting point. He paid just £600 for this car, and it was in pretty good condition anyway. There were a few bits that needed doing, but the biggest change that they did to this car was remove the sort of cloth beige interior, and Mike acquired a black leather interior which Ed fitted and cleaned up, and it did make it look really nice, to be fair. They gave it a good service, new discs and pads all round. The electric window motors needed replacing, and it needed an exhaust backs box, and that was it. Now cost wise on this, they spent £435 on the spares, on the repairs, sorry. So that gave a total of £1,035. When they came to sell it, Mike managed to sell it for £1,200, giving them a profit of £165. Now let's have a look at the valuation in today's terms, and I was quite surprised when I looked this one up. Practical Classics value that car in good condition, everything sorted, at £7,850, which I was quite surprised by. And that's an increase over what they sold that car for, £6,650. Now, finally, I know what you're asking, what has happened? The B920 HBD. Well, this program went out in October 2003. The tax last expired on that one in July 05, and there's no MOT records. Now, MOT electronic records started in about 2006, so it hasn't had an MOT since then, and the last V5 issue for that car was July 2004. So my instinct is that one's been scrapped as well, I'm afraid. Now, if you're still watching at this point, I'm going to ask you a big favour. Down there is a subscribe button, and that makes an awful lot of difference to us at Oscars. And I know a lot of people ask you for this, but of people watching this video now, probably somewhere around 80% aren't subscribers. And we want to carry on this series and follow through all the different cars that Wheeler Dealers have done and see what we can find out about what happened to them after the programme. So if you want to keep track of that, please do click that subscribe button. And the other thing is, if you have any information on any of the cars, it'd be great if you could comment below and give us an idea where some of them may have turned up. But anyway, on to our last car, and that is one that should be a good money car nowadays, and that is the highly sought after Volkswagen Golf GTI MK1. Now, Mike picked this up for an incredible £650, and I just find it absolutely amazing, considering we know how much these cars go for nowadays. Main problems with it, the gear linkage was a problem, so getting gears was a struggle. And the other thing was, the brakes were awful, and that was down to the brake master cylinder. There were a few trim bits missing. They had to put on a GTI decal. They had to repaint the red bit around the edge of the grille. There were some repairs to the dash rev counter that didn't work. Things like there were 3 little dials in the middle dash. Ed managed to get them up and running. And the other thing they did was it had some fairly basic steel wheels, which I don't think were the original ones for the GTI. And they actually replaced those with some nice Pirelli P alloys, which did look really nice. Now, spend-wise, they spent $515 on top of the $650 that they paid for it, and they sold it, it's going to make your eyes water, £1,550. That gave them a profit of £385, which I'm sure at the time Mike was very happy about. Today, that car in, fully sorted condition is valued by Practical Classics at £13,000. So that is an increase of £11,450, which I find absolutely eye-watering. Now, here's the big question. What's happened to that car? Now, this has had a little bit of an interesting history. Searching up EDV 646Y, its last tax expired at the end of 2014, and its last MOT expired in the middle of 2015. So that's relatively recent. So there's half a chance this car is still about. The last V5 was issued in 2014, so it hasn't been notified of any change of ownership since then. So it might still be with the last person to get it on the road. The other interesting thing I spotted with this car, when Wheeler Dealers were working on it, it done around about 114,000. And the last, looking at the MOT, 2007, it had only done a couple of thousand miles, it was up to 116. 09, it had done another 10,000. But then it goes quiet. There was no MOT after 2007 until 2014. And that's when it reappeared with still just 126,000 miles on the clock. So it really hasn't done a lot since the programme. So that one might just still be about. Well, I hope you enjoyed that little look back at the early cars of Wheeler Dealers. And next time, we're going to be looking at the next 3 that they did, which was an Austin Mini Mark 1. Now, we know they're big money now. A Mercedes-Benz 230. And finally, a Ford Capri, another car that we know is nowadays big money. So please do click on that subscribe button so you don't miss out for our next episode.